Billionaire's Christmas turned upside down after seeing ex-girlfriend with mini versions of himself. Don't forget to subscribe. It's very easy. Just press the like button, hit subscribe, and leave a comment saying, "I am with Mr. Peter." Let's begin this journey together with care, kindness, and love, and make every moment meaningful as we start with love. Some men measure their success by the zeros in their bank accounts, the towers that bear their names, the empires they've built from nothing. Christy Rogers had all of that, and it meant absolutely nothing the moment he saw her standing in the snow outside Harrington's department store, her hands resting on the shoulders of two boys who had his eyes, his stubborn chin, his exact crooked smile. 7 years of carefully constructed walls, of burying himself in mergers and acquisitions, of pretending he'd moved on from the woman who'd shattered him completely, came crashing down in the space of a single heartbeat. The town car had barely crawled through Belhaven's downtown shopping district, every storefront dripping with garland and twinkling lights that felt obscene in their cheerfulness. Christy had stared out the window with practiced indifference, the same expression he wore in boardrooms when someone pitched him a deal he had no intention of accepting. His sister Delphine had insisted he return for the annual Christmas charity gala at the Ashford estate, pulling every guilt string about their mother's declining health and family obligations. He'd resisted for weeks before finally surrendering to her persistence, booking the penthouse at the Belhaven Grand Hotel with the intention of staying exactly 3 days before, returning to his life in the city where memories didn't ambush him on every street corner. Then he saw her. Sonal. Rosa stood beneath the ancient elm tree that marked the entrance to the shopping district, snowflakes catching in her natural hair, her coat pulled tight against the December wind. She looked different, older, with a weariness around her eyes that hadn't been there before, but still heartbreakingly beautiful in a way that made his chest constrict. She was laughing at something one of the boys said, her head thrown back in that uninhibited way she had, completely unaware that she was being watched. The child on her left, bundled in a blue parka, was gesturing wildly with mittened hands, clearly telling some elaborate story. The boy on her right, wearing red, stood quieter but watchful, his gaze taking in everything around them with an intensity that felt familiar. Christy's hand had moved to the door handle before his brain could process what his eyes were seeing. The resemblance wasn't subtle. It screamed at him across the crowded sidewalk, undeniable and devastating. Those boys had the same widow's peak he saw in the mirror every morning, the same way of tilting their heads when they were listening carefully, the same everything that mattered. "Stop the car," he'd ordered, his voice coming out rough and strange. By the time his driver navigated to the curb and Christy pushed through the holiday shoppers clogging the sidewalk, they were gone. He stood where Sana had been standing, his expensive shoes sinking into the slush, staring at the empty space like he could will her back into existence. A few passing shoppers gave him curious looks, this tall man in a cashmere coat standing motionless in the falling snow, but he couldn't move. His mind was racing through calculations he didn't want to make, timelines he'd spent years trying to forget. She'd left him without explanation on a January morning. Her apartment emptied overnight, her phone disconnected, every trace of her existence erased as thoroughly as if she'd never been real at all. He'd searched for months, hiring investigators who'd turned up nothing, calling every mutual friend until they stopped taking his calls, driving himself half-mad with theories that ranged from witness protection to amnesia, to the darkest possibilities he couldn't let himself fully imagine. Eventually, exhausted and hollow, he'd convinced himself that her disappearance was a message he needed to accept. She hadn't wanted to be found. She hadn't loved him the way he'd loved her. He'd let her go because holding on was killing him piece by piece, but she'd been here, in Belhaven, the whole time, and those boys, those beautiful boys who couldn't be more than 6 or 7, who looked like miniature versions of himself, meant that when she'd left him, she'd been carrying his children. She'd made the decision to raise them alone, to keep them from him. To build an entire life that excluded him so completely, it felt like a physical wound. The snow fell harder, coating his shoulders, his hair, turning the world into a blur of white and Christmas lights. Christy pulled out his phone, his fingers numb as he scrolled to his assistant's number. Lorelei answered on the first ring, her voice crisp and professional, even though it was well past business hours. "I need you to find someone," he said. His words clipped. "Zana Rosa, she's living in Belhaven. I need to know everything. Where she works, where she lives, everything about her life for the past 7 years. And I need to know about her children. 2 boys, twins, approximately 6 or 7 years old. I need confirmation of their birth records, their names, every detail you can find. Mr. Rogers, are you? Just do it. Lorelei, tonight. I don't care what it costs." He ended the call and stood there in the snow until his driver gently touched his elbow, suggesting they should move before he caught pneumonia. The irony of that concern wasn't lost on him. Pneumonia would have been preferable to this, to the feeling that his heart was being systematically torn apart by invisible hands. The suite at the Belhaven Grand felt suffocating despite its generous square footage. Christy paced between the windows overlooking the town square, unable to settle, unable to think about anything except those 2 small faces that had haunted him for all of 30 seconds, but would haunt him for the rest of his life. His phone buzzed with incoming messages from Delphine asking if he'd arrived safely, from business partners wanting signatures on time-sensitive documents, from his mother's assistant confirming his attendance at tomorrow night's gala. He ignored all of them. Around midnight, his laptop chimed with an encrypted file from Lorelei. He opened it with hands that shook, a weakness he'd never have tolerated in himself before tonight. The report was thorough, devastating in its completeness. Zana Rosa, employed at Pemberton and Associates as a senior architect. Homeowner at a modest craftsman house on Willow Street. Active in the community, coaching youth basketball, volunteering at the local library. Never married, no significant relationships on record. And the boys, Timothy and Jackson Rosa, enrolled at Riverside Academy, healthy, thriving, no father listed on their birth certificates. The last detail felt like a deliberate erasure, a legal document that denied his existence as effectively as Sana's disappearance had. She'd given them her name, not his. She'd created a family that had no room for him, no acknowledgement that he'd ever mattered. Christy closed the laptop and walked to the window, pressing his forehead against the cold glass. Below, the Christmas lights of Belhaven twinkled with false promise. The same lights that had illuminated his childhood, his first kiss with Sana under the stars, his proposal on bended knee in front of the old courthouse. This town held every good memory he had, and she'd been living here the entire time, raising his sons, and she'd chosen silence. She'd chosen absence. She'd chosen to deny him the single most important thing he'd never known he wanted, until he saw it, standing in the snow. The rage that flooded through him was clean and cold, burning away the shock, leaving only the need for answers. Tomorrow he would find her. Tomorrow he would demand to know why. Tomorrow he would begin the process of claiming what should have been his all along, the right to know his own children, the truth about why the woman he'd loved had disappeared without giving him a chance to fight for them. But tonight, in the darkness of an expensive hotel suite that felt like a cage, Christy Rogers stood alone and let himself feel the full weight of 7 lost years, of first steps he'd never witnessed, of bedtime stories he'd never read, of 1,000 ordinary moments that had been stolen from him by a choice he still didn't understand. And somewhere across town, Sana Rosa was probably tucking those boys into bed, kissing their foreheads, whispering goodnight to children who had no idea their entire world was about to change. Chapter 2. The Investigation of a Broken Heart. Morning arrived with brutal brightness, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow in a way that hurt Christy's eyes. He'd barely slept, spending the hours before dawn reading and rereading Lorelei's report until he'd memorized every detail of the life Sana had built without him. The investigation felt invasive and necessary in equal measure, like picking at a wound to see how deep it went. Pemberton and Associates occupied a renovated textile mill downtown, all exposed brick and industrial windows that probably looked charming in the architectural magazines Sana used to leave scattered around her apartment. Christie remembered her talking about adaptive reuse projects with the kind of passion most people reserved for religion or falling in love, her hands moving expressively as she described transforming forgotten spaces into something vital and new. The irony that she'd built her career around restoration while abandoning their relationship wasn't lost on him. He arrived before her office opened, parking across the street where he could watch the entrance without being obvious. The waiting felt pathetic and necessary, the behavior of a man who'd lost all sense of dignity somewhere between seeing his sons for the first time and learning their mother had kept them hidden. Other employees trickled in, carrying coffee cups and briefcases, living ordinary lives that didn't include earth-shattering revelations delivered by Christmas lights and snowfall. Sana's car pulled into the lot at exactly 7:45, punctual as always, a silver sedan that had seen better years but was meticulously maintained. She emerged wearing a charcoal coat and carrying a leather bag that looked heavy enough to contain blueprints. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her look professional and guarded. Nothing like the woman who used to dance around her kitchen in his shirt while making breakfast. Unself-conscious and radiant, Christie was out of his car before he could talk himself out of confrontation, his feet carrying him across the street through traffic that honked irritably at his sudden appearance. She had her keys in hand, about to unlock the building's side entrance, when she sensed someone behind her and turned. The recognition that flooded her face went through so many stages he could barely track them all. Shock gave way to fear, gave way to anger, gave way to something that might have been longing before her expression hardened into a mask he didn't recognize. All softness erased, replaced by a woman who'd learned to protect herself. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out steady despite the way her hand tightened around her keys. "I saw you yesterday, outside Harrington's with them." She didn't pretend not to understand. Her jaw tightened, a muscle jumping beneath the smooth skin, and she glanced around the parking lot as if calculating escape routes. "You need to leave." "Those boys, Sana, they're mine." "They're mine," she corrected, her eyes flashing with fierce possessiveness. "I carried them. I birthed them. I've raised them every single day of their lives, while you've been building your empire and forgetting I existed." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "Forgetting? I searched for you for months. I hired investigators. I called every person we knew. You vanished like smoke and everyone acted like you'd never been real. You didn't search hard enough," she shot back, her voice rising despite her obvious attempt to stay calm. "I've been in Belhaven the entire time, Christie, living 3 miles from your family's estate, working at a firm your mother hired for the Thornbury renovations 2 years ago. If you'd actually wanted to find me, you would have." The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. "That's not fair." "Fair?" She laughed, a bitter sound nothing like the joy he'd heard yesterday when she was with the boys. "You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you what's fair. It's protecting your children from a family that made it crystal clear I wasn't good enough, that our love wasn't acceptable, that any child we had together would be a disappointment and a burden on the precious Rogers legacy." "What are you talking about?" Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or calculation. "You really don't know?" "Don't know what?" She studied him for a long moment, and he could see her weighing how much to reveal, what truths she could afford to share. "Your mother and your brother came to see me the week before I left. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse, Christie. They told me your inheritance, your position in the family business, your entire future depended on marrying within your social circle. They said if I truly loved you, I'd disappear so you wouldn't have to choose between me and everything you'd worked for. They said you'd resent me eventually, resent any children we had, and they'd make sure of it." The parking lot seemed to tilt beneath his feet. "That's not possible. It's absolutely possible. It's exactly what happened. They painted me a very detailed picture of what my life would look like if I stayed. The social exile, the constant reminders that I wasn't welcome, the ways they'd make sure our children felt inferior their entire lives. So yes, I left. I protected you from having to make that choice, and I protected my babies from growing up in a family that would have destroyed them with conditional love and impossible expectations. You should have told me. You should have let me decide, so you could sacrifice everything, so you could wake up in 10 years and look at me and our children and wonder what your life might have been if you hadn't given it all up. I couldn't do that to you, Christy. I couldn't let you become a man who resented the people he loved most. That wasn't your decision to make alone. Someone had to make it, and you were too in love to see clearly. I saw the future, and I chose the path that hurt least. The path that hurt least, he repeated, his voice dropping to something dangerous and quiet. You took my children from me. You stole 7 years of their lives, and you're standing here acting like you did me a favor. Her composure cracked, tears gathering in her eyes, though she refused to let them fall. I did what I thought was right. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was selfish. Maybe I just couldn't face the reality of loving someone whose family would always see me as less than. But I gave Tim and Jack a childhood free from that poison, and I'd make the same choice again. Tim and Jack, he said softly, tasting their names. You didn't even give them my name. They have my name because I'm the one who's been there. I'm the one who walked the floors when they had colic. I'm the one who taught them to read and held them when they had nightmares and sacrificed everything to give them a good life. You don't get credit for DNA, Christy. You get credit for showing up and you weren't there. Because you didn't give me the chance. They stared at each other across 3 feet of snowy pavement, all the years and anger and grief hanging between them like a physical presence. The cars were pulling into the lot now, and Sana seemed to realize they had an audience. Her professional mask slammed back into place, all vulnerability erased. You need to leave. If you continue to harass me, I'll get a restraining order. My children have a stable, happy life, and I will not let you disrupt that because your ego is hurt. This isn't about ego. This is about my sons. They're not your sons. They're mine. You're a stranger who happens to share their genetics, and genetics don't make you a father, Christy. Being there makes you a father, and you weren't there. She turned and walked into the building without looking back, her shoulders rigid with determination. Christy stood in the parking lot, snow beginning to fall again, feeling like he'd been hollowed out and filled with something sharp and unforgiving. Around him, ordinary people went about their ordinary days, completely unaware that his entire world had just been rebuilt on a foundation that was already crumbling. His phone buzzed. A text from Delphine. Where are you? Mother wants to discuss seating arrangements for the gala. He deleted the message without responding and got back in his car, his hands gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles went white. Somewhere in this town, his sons were probably sitting in a classroom, learning multiplication or reading stories, or doing whatever children their age did. And he had no right to be there, no claim to them beyond biology, because the woman he'd loved had decided 7 years ago that he was better off not knowing they existed. The worst part, the part that was tearing him apart from the inside, was that he couldn't entirely argue with her logic. His family was toxic in ways he'd spent his adult life trying to escape. His mother's values were precisely as narrow and cruel as Sana described. If he'd known about the pregnancy, he would have burned every bridge and sacrificed every dollar to keep them safe. And maybe Sana was right that he would have regretted it eventually. Maybe she'd saved him from a life of bitter what-ifs and growing resentment. Or maybe she'd just been scared and made the easy choice. The choice that let her play the martyr while denying him the single most important thing he'd never known he wanted. Either way, he was going to find out the truth. He was going to talk to his family. He was going to get answers to questions he hadn't known to ask 7 years ago. And somehow, someway, he was going to find a path back into his sons' lives, even if Sena spent every day fighting to keep him out. Chapter 3. The First Confrontation. Christie waited outside Pemberton and Associates on a freezing Monday morning, knowing Sana would arrive early as she always did. When she saw him standing by her car, her face went through a cascade of emotions before hardening into a mask he didn't recognize. "What are you doing here?" Her voice came out steady despite the way her hand tightened around her keys. "I saw you yesterday, outside Harrington's, with them." She didn't pretend not to understand. "You need to leave. Those boys, Sana, they're mine." "They're mine," she corrected, her eyes flashing with fierce possessiveness. "I carried them. I birthed them. I've raised them every single day of their lives while you've been building your empire and forgetting I existed." The accusation hit like a physical blow. "Forgetting? I searched for you for months. I hired investigators. I called every person we knew. You vanished like smoke." "You didn't search hard enough. I've been in Belhaven the entire time, Christie, living 3 miles from your family's estate. If you'd actually wanted to find me, you would have." "That's not fair." "Fair?" She laughed bitterly. "Let me tell you what's fair. It's protecting your children from a family that made it crystal clear I wasn't good enough, that any child we had together would be a disappointment and a burden on the precious Rogers legacy." "What are you talking about?" Something flickered across her face. "You really don't know. Your mother and your brother came to see me the week before I left. They made me an offer I couldn't refuse. They told me your inheritance depended on marrying within your social circle. They said if I truly loved you, I'd disappear, so you wouldn't have to choose between me and everything you'd worked for." The parking lot seemed to tilt beneath his feet. "That's not possible." "It's exactly what happened. They painted me a very detailed picture of what my life would look like if I stayed. So yes, I left. I protected you from having to make that choice, and I protected my babies from growing up in a family that would have destroyed them. You should have told me. You should have let me decide. So you could sacrifice everything. So you could wake up in 10 years and resent me and our children. I couldn't do that to you. And that wasn't your decision to make alone. Someone had to make it, and you were too in love to see clearly. You took my children from me. You stole 7 years of their lives, and you're acting like you did me a favor." Her composure cracked, tears gathering, though she refused to let them fall. "I did what I thought was right. Maybe I was wrong, maybe I was selfish, but I gave Tim and Jack a childhood free from that poison, and I'd make the same choice again." "Tim and Jack," he said softly, tasting their names. "You didn't even give them my name." They have my name because I'm the one who's been there. You don't get credit for DNA, Christie. You get credit for showing up, and you weren't there. Because you didn't give me the chance." They stared at each other across 3 feet of snowy pavement, all the years and anger hanging between them. Other cars were pulling into the lot now, and Sana's professional mask slammed back into place. "You need to leave. If you continue to harass me, I'll get a restraining order. My children have a stable, happy life, and I will not let you disrupt that. This isn't about ego. This is about my sons. They're not your sons. You're a stranger who happens to share their genetics." She turned and walked into the building without looking back, leaving Christie standing in the cold, feeling hollowed out. Around him, ordinary people went about ordinary days, completely unaware that his entire world had just crumbled. Chapter 4. The Failed Peace Offering. Christie tried a different approach. He sent gifts to the house on Willow Street. Elaborate. Toys, expensive art supplies, everything two boys their age might want. The boxes came back unopened with a terse note: "You can't buy your way into their lives." He tried showing up at Tim and Jack's basketball games, standing at the back of the gymnasium. Sana saw him and asked the school to add him to a restricted list, claiming harassment. His sister Delphine tried to intervene, meeting Sana for coffee at the Riverside Cafe. When she returned, her expression was grim. "She's not budging, Christie. She told me that if you'd really wanted to find her, you could have. She's been in Bellhaven this whole time. The fact that you didn't know about the boys for 7 years tells her everything she needs to know about your actual commitment." The accusation felt like a knife between his ribs. "That's not fair. I searched for months." She says months weren't enough. She says if you truly loved her, you would have searched for years. I thought she wanted me to stop. Every dead end felt like a message that respecting her choice meant letting her go. I told her that. I don't think she believed me. Christie dropped into a chair. "So what do I do?" She said if you really want to be a father, you need to prove you understand what that means. It's not about gifts or money or even love. It's about showing up every day, even when it's hard, even when you're not getting anything in return. How am I supposed to show up when she won't let me near them? Delphine gathered her coat. Maybe the question isn't how you get what you want. Maybe it's what you can do for them that has nothing to do with your own needs. The answer came slowly. There was a youth basketball program where Tim played, always struggling for funding. A community center where Jack took art classes, desperately in need of supplies. A scholarship fund at Riverside Academy that helped families afford tuition. He could fund those things anonymously, make his son's world better without demanding credit, without expecting gratitude. It wouldn't get him what he wanted, but it would be something. Over the following weeks, Christie quietly transferred money to programs that touched his son's lives. He established funds in Sana's name, not his. He volunteered at the community center, working with children in art classes, but never approaching Jack. Sana noticed. Delphine reported back that Sana seemed confused by the changes, uncertain whether to be grateful or more suspicious. But she didn't return anything this time. The silence felt like progress. Then his mother's lawyers served Sana with grandparents' rights documentation. Delphine called in a panic. Mother filed papers claiming the Rogers family has a right to visitation. She found out about the boys and decided she deserved access. She wouldn't. She did. And Christie, Sana is going to think you were behind it. He drove to Willow Street through evening traffic, his heart pounding. The Craftsman house had lights blazing when he arrived. He was halfway up the walk when the front door opened and Sana stepped out. Even from a distance he could see the fury in her posture. "Don't come any closer. Whatever you think you're going to say, I don't want to hear it." "Sana, please." "I didn't know she was going to do this. I had nothing to do with the legal filing." "And I'm supposed to believe that? Your mother's lawyers just coincidentally filed for grandparents' rights weeks after you found out? That's your story?" "It's the truth. I cut ties with her after I learned what she did. But she's vindictive and controlling, and apparently she decided she had rights regardless of what I wanted." "Your children." That's interesting phrasing, considering they don't know you exist. "Because you won't let them know me. Because I'm protecting them from exactly this, from legal battles and manipulation. You stood in a parking lot and swore you were different from them, but here we are. They're my sons too. No, they're the boys I raised alone while you were off building your empire. And I will fight with everything I have to keep you and your mother away from them." She went back inside and closed the door. Through the window he saw her sink onto the couch, her sons immediately flanking her, their small hands patting her arms in gestures of comfort. The image would haunt him far longer than any accusation. His phone buzzed with a text from Temperance Bailey. "If you set foot on this property again, I will have you arrested. This is your only warning." Chapter 5. The Accidental Meeting. The community center on Riverside Boulevard smelled like industrial cleaner and the particular brand of chaos that came from housing multiple youth programs under one roof. Christy had been volunteering here for 3 weeks now, helping with an after-school art program that served children from across Bellhaven. He kept his head down, worked with the kids who gravitated toward him, and tried not to think about the fact that his own son sometimes attended classes in a room down the hall. He'd learned to time his arrivals carefully, showing up after Jack's class ended to avoid any awkward encounters or accusations of stalking. The volunteer work was genuine. He'd discovered an unexpected satisfaction in helping children develop their artistic skills, in watching them gain confidence as their drawings improved. It was also torture, being so close to his son's world, but forbidden from entering it. The New Year's Day community event at Founders Park wasn't something he'd planned to attend. Delphine had convinced him to make an appearance, arguing that hiding away in his hotel suite wasn't sustainable, that he needed to exist in the world even if that world currently felt hostile and unwelcoming. The park was crowded with families, everyone bundled against the cold, children running between booths, selling hot chocolate and handmade crafts. Christy wandered through the festivities with no particular destination, watching parents with their children and feeling the familiar ache of exclusion. He'd convinced himself he was ready to leave when he heard a voice behind him. "You're the man from the basketball games." He turned to find 2 boys standing there, identical down to the gap between their front teeth, wearing matching blue jackets but with completely different expressions. One looked bold and curious, his stance confident. The other hung back slightly, watching Christy with an intensity that was unnerving in someone so young. His sons, standing 3 feet away, speaking to him voluntarily. Christy's heart hammered so hard he was certain they could hear it. "I am. You must be Tim and Jack." The bold one grinned. "I'm Tim, that's Jack. How do you know our names?" "No." "Lucky guess." "You're wearing jerseys with your names on them." Tim looked down at his jacket, then laughed. "Oh yeah, Mum says we shouldn't talk to strangers, but you're not really a stranger if you come to all our games, right?" Every instinct screamed at Christy to say something, to claim them, to tell them the truth. But Sana would never forgive him if he revealed their relationship without her permission, and he couldn't bear the thought of making this worse than it already was. "I'm just someone who appreciates good basketball." "You've got serious talent. Coach says I need to work on my defense," Tim said, launching into an enthusiastic description of his season statistics. While Tim talked, Jack continued his silent observation, those familiar eyes studying Christy's face with the kind of attention that suggested he was cataloging details for later analysis. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than his brother's, but somehow more impactful. "You have the same eyes as us." The observation hung in the air. Tim stopped mid-sentence, turning to look at his brother, then at Christy, his expression shifting from friendly to confused. "Jack's right. And your chin. You have the thing Mom calls the stubborn chin." Tim tilted his head, processing. "Are you related to us somehow?" Christy's mouth went dry. This was the moment he'd imagined 1,000 times. But in his imagination, he'd always been more prepared, had better words, knew the right thing to say. Reality offered no such clarity. "I knew your mother a long time ago. Before you were born, but you don't know her now?" Jack asked, his quiet voice cutting straight to the heart of things. "It's complicated." Tim moved closer, his natural boldness overriding caution. "Is that why Mom cries sometimes, when she looks at the pictures she keeps in her dresser? The ones she thinks we don't know about?" The revelation that Sanaa kept photographs, that she still had pieces of their past hidden away, sent a wave of emotion through Christy that he struggled to contain. "Your mom has reasons for the choices she's made." "Good reasons." You should trust that she's doing what's best for you. Adults always say stuff like that when they don't want to explain things, Tim said, but without real malice. You still didn't answer Jack's question about your eyes, though. Before Christy could formulate a response that wasn't a lie but wouldn't betray Sana's trust, he heard her voice cutting through the crowd, sharp with panic. "Tim! Jack!" She appeared between booths, breathless and wild-eyed, scanning the crowd until she spotted them. The relief that flooded her face lasted exactly 2 seconds until she realized who they were talking to. Then fear and fury replaced everything else. Get away from them! She was running now, closing the distance with the kind of speed that came from pure maternal terror. "Tim, Jack, come here right now!" The boys looked confused by her reaction, but obeyed immediately, moving to their mother's side. She pulled them behind her in a gesture of protection that was both physically unnecessary and deeply revealing of where her mind had gone. "We were just talking," Tim protested. "He was telling us about basketball. I don't care what he was telling you. You don't talk to strangers. But, Mom, he comes to all our games. He's not really a stranger. He absolutely is a stranger, and you are never, ever to approach him again. Do you understand me?" Jack had gone quiet, his eyes moving between his mother and Christy, processing dynamics that seemed beyond his years. "Why are you so scared, Mom?" "I'm not scared. I'm protecting you." "From what?" Tim asked. "He's just a guy." Sana's control was fracturing. Christy could see it in the way her hands shook where they gripped her son's shoulders, in the tears gathering at the corners of her eyes, despite her obvious effort to appear calm. "From complications you're too young to understand." "That's what adults always say," Tim muttered, echoing his earlier complaint. Christy took a step forward, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Sana, I didn't approach them. They came to me. I was leaving. This was completely— I don't believe you. You're always there, always watching, always finding ways to insert yourself where you don't belong. This stops now. I will get a restraining order if that's what it takes to keep you away from my children." "They approached me," he repeated, his voice steady despite the chaos he felt inside. "I understand you're angry. You have every right to be angry. But I have never and would never use them to circumvent your wishes. I was answering questions they asked, nothing more. You should have walked away the moment they spoke to you, and teach them that adults can't be trusted to have civil conversations. That any interaction is dangerous. Any interaction with you is dangerous. You represent everything I left to protect them from. I represent their father," Christy said quietly, the truth finally spoken aloud in the presence of his sons. "Whether you acknowledge that or not, whether they know it or not, that's what I am." Tim's head whipped toward his mother. "What does he mean?" Sana's face crumbled. The mask of control she'd maintained, the fierce protection she'd wielded like armor, all of it collapsed in the face of her son's question. "We're leaving now, both of you, back to the car." "Mom, what did he mean about being our father?" Tim's voice was rising, attracting attention from other families nearby. "We don't have a father. You said he wasn't in the picture. Timothy, this is not the time or place. Is he our father?" Jack asked, his quiet voice somehow louder than his brother's shouting. "Is that why he has our eyes?" The crowd around them had stopped pretending not to listen. Parents were staring openly now, children tugging on sleeves and asking questions, the entire scene devolving into exactly the kind of public spectacle Sana had spent 7 years avoiding. "Please," she whispered, though whether she was talking to Christy or her sons or the universe in general wasn't clear. "Please don't do this here." "Then where?" Christy asked. "Where are you going to have this conversation that you've been avoiding for 7 years? When were you going to tell them the truth?" "The truth?" Her voice gained strength from anger. "You want to talk about truth? The truth is you let me disappear. The truth is you built your empire while I raised our children alone. The truth is you're a stranger who shares their DNA, and that doesn't make you their father any more than writing a check makes you a philanthropist." "I didn't know they existed." "You made certain of that. I protected them from your family's poison. You protected yourself from having to admit you gave up on us." The accusation hung between them, sharp and cruel and probably unfair, but Christie was beyond caring about fairness. He was watching his sons' faces cycle through confusion and hurt and dawning understanding, watching Sana realize she'd lost control of a narrative she'd carefully constructed, and he felt simultaneously guilty for causing this scene and righteously angry that it had come to this at all. A woman appeared beside Sana, tall and imposing, her expression suggesting she'd gladly commit violence on behalf of her friend. This had to be Temperance Bailey, the lawyer who'd been threatening restraining orders. "Sana, take the boys to the car. I'll handle this. Temperance, go now before this gets worse." Sana nodded mutely and ushered Tim and Jack away, though both boys kept looking back, their faces full of questions that weren't going to be answered today. Christie watched them go, his heart breaking at the confusion he'd caused, the stability he'd disrupted. Temperance waited until they were out of earshot before stepping close enough that only he could hear her words. "If you ever approach those children again, if you ever create another public scene that traumatizes them and their mother, I will destroy you. I don't care how much money you have or how many lawyers you can afford. I will make your life a living hell. I didn't plan this. They came to me. I don't care. Find a way to stay away from them, or I'll find a way to make sure you have no choice in the matter. Are we clear?" She didn't wait for an answer, just turned and followed in the direction Sana and the boys had gone. Christie stood alone in the middle of the park, surrounded by families who were now whispering and pointing, his presence having transformed a community celebration into gossip fodder that would spread through Bellhaven by nightfall. He walked back to his car through empty streets, the cold biting through his coat, feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. He'd wanted his sons to know the truth, but not like this, never like this, and now they knew. But the knowledge had come wrapped in their mother's fear and his own desperation, and there was no way that foundation would support anything healthy or whole. His phone buzzed. A text from Delphine. "I heard what happened at the park. Come to my place. You shouldn't be alone right now." But alone was exactly what he deserved, what he'd earned through his inability to navigate this situation with any grace or wisdom. His sons knew he existed now, but they'd learned it through an argument that revealed every fracture in their parents' relationship, every wound that had never healed. He'd wanted to be their father, but tonight he'd shown them nothing except that adults could turn love into weapons and use children as battlegrounds. The hotel suite felt smaller than usual, the walls closing in, the silence oppressive. Christie sat in the dark and replayed every moment of the conversation, every word he could have said differently, every choice that might have led to a better outcome. But there were no better outcomes, not really. The truth had always been going to hurt, no matter how it was revealed. At least now it was out there. No longer a secret festering in the space between them. He just had to hope that Tim and Jack were resilient enough to survive learning that their father was a stranger who'd caused their mother to cry in public, and that someday, somehow, there might be a chance to become something more than the man who'd ruined their New Year's Day. Chapter 6. The Revelation of Deeper Wounds. Delphine showed up at his suite the next morning with coffee and the determined expression of someone who wasn't taking no for an answer. She let herself in with the spare key he'd given her, found him still in yesterday's clothes, and set the coffee on the table with enough force to make him look up from where he'd been staring at nothing for hours. "You look like hell. Thank you for that assessment. Get in the shower. We're going to talk, but I refuse to do it while you smell like defeat and desperation." He wanted to argue but didn't have the energy. The hot water helped marginally, though it couldn't wash away the memory of his sons' confused faces or Sana's devastation. When he emerged, Delphine had ordered breakfast from room service and was sitting on the couch with a manila folder in her lap. What's that? The full truth about what Sana went through 7 years ago. The parts you don't know yet, the parts I've been piecing together from conversations with people who were there. Christie's stomach twisted. I'm not sure I want to know. Too bad. You need to understand what she sacrificed, what she survived. So you stop making this about your wounded pride and start making it about actually becoming the father those boys deserve. She opened the folder and pulled out what looked like hospital records. Financial statements, legal documents. After our mother and Griffin threatened her, Sana left Belhaven with nothing except her clothes and her laptop. She went to a women's shelter in Providence because she had no money, no family support, nowhere else to go. She worked double shifts at an all-night diner while finishing her architecture degree online, studying between serving coffee to drunks and cleaning up after people who treated her like she was invisible. How do you know all this? I hired a different kind of investigator than you did. One who talked to actual people instead of just searching databases. Sana's friend Temperance was there through everything. She gave me some details, though she made it clear she was only doing it because she thinks you might actually be capable of change, which I personally find optimistic. Delphine spread out medical records. She discovered she was pregnant about 5 weeks after she left you. She was terrified, alone, working herself to exhaustion at a diner that paid minimum wage plus tips. She had no health insurance. The free clinic confirmed she was carrying twins, which meant higher risk, more complications, more expenses she couldn't possibly afford. Why didn't she reach out? It would have helped, because our mother had told her that any attempt to contact you would result in legal action, that she'd claim Sana was a gold digger, that she'd tie her up in court until she couldn't afford to fight back. Sana believed her, and why wouldn't she? She'd seen how the Rogers family operated, how we destroyed anyone who didn't fit into our narrow definition of acceptable. The guilt was suffocating. Keep going. She gave birth to Tim and Jack in a hospital where the staff treated her with suspicion because she was a single black mother with no family listed on her intake forms. No partner in the waiting room, no obvious support system. Temperance was there, but the nurses kept asking invasive questions about the father, about whether she'd be able to care for the babies, about whether social services needed to be involved. Christie's hands clenched into fists. They had no right. No, they didn't. But that's the reality Sana faced while you were building your tech empire and convincing yourself she'd wanted to disappear. She spent the first year of the twins' lives in a tiny apartment above a laundromat, working from home when clients would hire her, taking any drafting job she could get, living on 3 hours of sleep because the babies took turns screaming through the night and she had no help. Why didn't anyone help her? Who was going to help? Her parents disowned her when she dropped out of college initially to be with you, remember? She had no siblings, no family support. Temperance helped when she could, but she was in law school, barely surviving herself. Sana did it alone because she had no choice, because she'd made a decision to protect you from your family's ultimatum, and she was too proud to admit she might have been wrong. Delphine pulled out more documents. Here's where it gets worse. 2 years after the twins were born, our mother's investigators found her. I found the reports in Mother's private papers after your confrontation at Thornbury Manor. She knew about the babies, Christie. She'd known for over 4 years before you found out. The room tilted. That's not possible. It's absolutely possible. Mother hired lawyers to draw up custody documents, claiming the Rogers family had rights to the children, despite your relationship with Sana being over. She was preparing to take them from her, to use our family's resources to prove Sana was an unfit mother because she was struggling financially, because she was raising them in a small apartment, because she didn't meet Mother's standards of acceptable parenting. How did Sana stop her? Temperance had just passed the bar. She fought back with every legal maneuver she could think of. threatened to go public with the story of how our family had threatened and manipulated Sanaa, how we'd driven her away, then tried to steal her children. Mother backed off, but only temporarily. For years, Sanaa lived in fear that we'd come back, that someday there would be a knock on the door and someone would try to take Tim and Jack from her. Christy felt sick. I didn't know any of it because you stopped looking. Because after a few months of dead ends, you convinced yourself she wanted to be gone, and you let that belief excuse giving up. Meanwhile, Sanaa was 3 miles away, raising your children in poverty and fear, sacrificing everything so you wouldn't have to choose between her and your family's money. I would have chosen her. Every time. Maybe, but she didn't know that, and our family made sure she believed the opposite. They convinced her that loving you meant setting you free, and then they spent years trying to destroy her for the crime of existing. Delphine gathered the papers back into the folder. This is what you're up against, Christy. Not just Sanaa's anger, but years of trauma that our family inflicted. She's not keeping you away from Tim and Jack to be cruel. She's keeping you away because every instinct she has says that letting a Rogers near her children means danger, means potential loss, means everything she's fought to protect could be ripped away. So what do I do? I don't know. But I do know that grand gestures and expensive gifts aren't going to fix this. You need to prove, over time, with consistent actions, that you're different from the family she ran from. And even then it might not be enough. Some wounds are too deep to fully heal. After Delphine left, Christy sat with the information she'd given him, feeling the weight of his own ignorance and his family's cruelty pressing down until he could barely breathe. Sanaa hadn't just left him. She'd survived years of fear and struggle that he'd been completely unaware of, while he'd built his fortune and nursed his wounded pride. He needed to see his mother one more time, not for closure, not for understanding, but to make absolutely certain she understood what she'd destroyed and what she'd never be allowed near again. Thornbury Manor looked exactly the same as it always had. Cold and imposing, a monument to legacy that had been built on the broken backs of people deemed unworthy. Mrs. Pemberton answered the door with sympathy in her eyes. But Christy didn't stop to acknowledge it. He walked directly to the morning room, where his mother spent her afternoons, pushed open the door, and found her with Griffin, the two of them deep in conversation that stopped the moment they saw him. "We need to talk," Christy said, his voice deadly calm. "Darling, if you've come to apologize for your behavior, I've come to make sure you understand that you will never ever have contact with my sons. Not now, not ever. You will withdraw your grandparents' rights petition. You will ensure that Griffin withdraws his support of it, and you will stay away from Sanaa and the boys for the rest of your miserable life." Constance stood, drawing herself up in indignation. "You can't speak to me that way. I'm your mother. You're nothing to me. You destroyed the woman I loved. You terrorized her for years with legal threats and investigators. You tried to take my children from their mother because you believed your legacy was more important than their well-being. That doesn't make you a mother. That makes you a monster." "We were protecting the family," Griffin interjected, his voice sharp. "The family isn't worth protecting. It's a diseased tree that needs to be cut down so nothing else can grow in its poisoned soil. I'm done with all of it. My lawyers are drawing up documents that legally sever all my connections to the Rogers family business and holdings. Delphine is getting everything because she's the only one of you with an actual soul. You'll regret this," Constance said, "when you're older, when you've had time to reflect. The only thing I regret is not seeing clearly what you were years ago. If I had, Sanaa never would have been in a position where she felt leaving was her only option. You preyed on her fear and her love for me, and you turned that into a weapon. That's unforgivable." He turned to leave but paused at the door. "When I was a child, I used to wonder why Dad spent so much time at the office, why he seemed so tired when he came home, why he always looked sad even when he was smiling. I understand now. He was trying to escape this place, this family, the prison of expectations that crushed anything genuine or real. I'm sorry I didn't understand that sooner. Maybe if I had, I could have saved him from dying while still trying to earn approval from people who weren't capable of giving it. Constance's face went pale. Your father loved this family. My father survived this family. There's a difference. He walked out of Thornbury Manor for what he knew would be the last time, feeling lighter despite the heaviness of everything he'd learned. The Rogers family legacy could burn to the ground for all he cared. The only legacy that mattered now was the one he hadn't started building yet. The possibility of being a father to two boys who barely knew his name. But first, he had to find a way to prove to Sana that he understood what she'd survived, that he wasn't going to let his family hurt her again, and that if she gave him a chance, he would spend the rest of his life making sure his sons never felt the conditional love and impossible expectations that had defined his own childhood. The question was whether understanding and good intentions would be enough, or whether the damage was already too complete to ever fully repair. Chapter 7. The Slow Thaw and Sudden Freeze. February arrived with the kind of cold that settled into bones and refused to leave. The whole town blanketed in snow that had long since lost its Christmas charm and become simply another obstacle to navigate. Christy had stopped the grand gestures, stopped showing up places where he might accidentally encounter Sana or the boys. Instead, he'd taken Delphine's advice and focused on supporting the programs and places that mattered to his sons' lives, always anonymously, never seeking credit or acknowledgement. The youth basketball program received a donation large enough to renovate their gymnasium and hire 2 additional coaches. The community center where Jack took art classes suddenly had funding for new supplies and equipment, including tablets and software that would let children create digital art alongside traditional methods. Riverside Academy established a scholarship fund in Sana Rosa's name, dedicated to supporting students pursuing careers in architecture and design. He'd also started seeing a therapist, Dr. Opal Winters, a woman with grey locks and penetrating eyes who didn't let him hide behind justifications or wounded pride. Their sessions were brutal in their honesty, forcing him to examine not just his current situation, but the patterns he'd carried from childhood, the ways his family's dysfunction had shaped his understanding of love and obligation and worth. "You're trying to earn their love," Dr. Winters had said during one particularly difficult session, "the same way you spent your childhood trying to earn your mother's approval. But love isn't transactional, Christy. It's not something you can purchase with good behavior or generous donations. Either it's freely given or it's not real. So what do? You do the work of becoming someone worthy of that gift without expecting the gift to ever arrive. You become the father those boys deserve, whether or not you ever get to be their father in practice. And you let go of the outcome because the outcome isn't yours to control." It sounded impossibly difficult and probably hopeless, but he'd started trying anyway. Small steps, quiet changes, learning to exist in a world where his sons were real but unreachable, where every day required choosing to show up without knowing if showing up would ever matter. Sanae noticed the changes. He knew she noticed because Delphine reported conversations where Sanae seemed confused by the scholarships and donations bearing her name, uncertain whether to be grateful or more suspicious. But she didn't return anything this time. She didn't send angry notes or legal threats. The silence felt like progress, even if it was the most painful progress imaginable. Then, on a late February afternoon, Tim and Jack made a discovery that changed everything. They'd been playing in the attic of the Willow Street house, exploring boxes of old belongings their mother had stored away. Jack found a wooden chest tucked behind seasonal decorations, locked but with the key still in the keyhole. Inside were photograph albums, ticket stubs, dried flowers pressed between pages, and letters. So many letters. Tim and Jack sat on the dusty attic floor and read every single one. The letters told a story they'd never known existed. A man named Christy writing to their mother with words full of love and dreams and promises, planning a future that included children and a house with a big backyard and Sunday mornings making pancakes together, describing how much he loved her, how she made him believe in possibilities he'd never imagined before meeting her. The last letter was dated a week before she'd disappeared from his life, talking about wedding venues and honeymoon destinations and how he couldn't wait to spend forever with her. When Sana came home from work, she found them sitting at the kitchen table with the letters spread out between them, their expressions serious in a way that made her stomach drop. "Where did you get those?" Her voice came out sharper than she'd intended, fear making her harsh. "The attic," Jack said quietly. "In the chest. Those are private. You had no right—" "Is he our father?" Tim interrupted, his boldness carrying a weight it hadn't had before. "The man from the park, the one you said was a stranger. Is he the person who wrote these letters?" Sana sank into a chair, all the energy draining out of her. This conversation had been inevitable since the scene at Founders Park, but she'd been avoiding it, hoping the boys would forget, hoping she could maintain the fiction a little longer. Looking at their faces now, at the intelligence and awareness in their eyes, she realized they'd already figured out most of it themselves. "Yes," she said finally. "Christy Rogers is your biological father. Why didn't you tell us?" Jack's quiet voice was somehow more devastating than Tim's louder questions. "Why did you lie?" "I didn't lie, I didn't tell you the whole truth because I was protecting you." "From what?" Tim demanded. "From having a father? From knowing someone wanted us? From a family that would have hurt you?" "His family, the Rogers family, they're wealthy and powerful, and they didn't think I was good enough. They told me to leave, to disappear, so Christy wouldn't have to choose between me and his inheritance. I left because I loved him, because I didn't want him to sacrifice everything for us and end up resenting me, resenting you, for what he'd lost." "But that was your choice," Tim said, his voice cracking. "You decided for all of us. You decided he couldn't know about us. You decided we couldn't know about him. That wasn't fair. I was trying to do what was best." "For who?" Jack asked. "For us. Or for you?" The question landed like a physical blow. Sanaya looked at her sons, these boys she'd raised alone, protected fiercely, loved with everything she had, and saw the hurt in their eyes that she'd put there. Not intentionally, not maliciously, but the outcome was the same. She'd made decisions that affected their entire lives without ever asking if those were the right decisions, without considering that maybe her fear had guided her more than their actual needs. "I don't know anymore," she admitted, tears finally spilling over. "I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was doing the right thing. But maybe I was protecting myself from having to admit I was scared, that I wasn't brave enough to fight for us, that it was easier to run than to stand my ground." Tim pushed back from the table. "He's been coming to our games all season. He volunteers at the art center. Jack showed me the new tablets and supplies that showed up in January. Those came right after we saw him at the park. He's been helping us without even being able to talk to us, and you kept him away." "Because I was afraid." "You're always afraid," Tim shouted, his composure finally breaking. "Afraid of his family, afraid of what people think, afraid of everything. But you're not the only one who gets hurt by that. We're hurt too. We don't have a father because you were too scared to let us have one." He stormed out of the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the stairs. Jack lingered, studying his mother with those observant eyes that missed nothing. "I read all the letters, Mom. He loved you, really loved you. And the last letter, where he was talking about us being a family someday, he sounded happy, like we would have been something he wanted, not something he had to sacrifice for. Jack, I'm not mad at you, not like Tim is, but I think maybe you were wrong. I think maybe you should have trusted him more. And I think maybe you should trust him now, Because he's trying really hard to be someone who deserves to know us. And you won't even give him a chance. Jack followed his brother upstairs, leaving Sana alone in the kitchen, surrounded by letters she'd kept hidden for 7 years. Words of love she'd never been able to throw away. She picked up one at random and read Christie's familiar handwriting describing their future. I want to be the kind of father who shows up for every soccer game and school play, who knows how to braid hair and tie ties, who teaches our kids that love isn't about conditions or expectations, but about showing up every day and choosing them over and over again. She'd stolen that from him. She'd stolen it from their sons. And she'd done it while telling herself she was being noble, being protective, being smart. But maybe she'd just been a coward, running from a fight she'd been too afraid to face. The following days were tense in the Willow Street house. Tim barely spoke to her, his anger simmering in silence. Jack was gentler but distant, processing everything in his quiet way. Sana tried to explain, tried to help them understand her reasoning, but every conversation felt like it was building walls instead of bridges. Temperance came over for dinner one evening, took one look at the situation, and pulled Sana into the backyard where they could talk privately. "You're losing them," Temperance said bluntly. "Not physically, not practically, but emotionally. They're starting to see you as the obstacle between them and their father, and that's not a position you want to be in." "I was protecting them." "I know you were. I was there, remember? I watched you sacrifice everything. But Sana, protection can become prison, and your boys are old enough to recognize the bars now. What am I supposed to do?" "You're supposed to consider that maybe Christy Rogers isn't the same man whose family drove you away 7 years ago. You're supposed to acknowledge that he's been doing the work without demanding anything in return. And you're supposed to ask yourself if your refusal to let him into the boys' lives is really about protecting them, or if it's about protecting yourself from having to forgive him for not fighting harder to find you." "I don't know how to forgive him." "Then figure it out. Because your sons are watching, and they're learning from you whether love is something that requires perfection or something that allows for growth and second chances. What do you want to teach them?" After Temperance left, Sana sat in the kitchen with the letters spread out again, reading through years of devotion and planning and hope. She'd kept these hidden because throwing them away felt like erasing the only proof that someone had loved her that completely. But keeping them hidden had also meant holding on to the past in a way that prevented any possibility of a future. She pulled out her phone and stared at it for a long time before finally typing a message. "We need to talk, not about legal rights or boundaries or who was right and who was wrong. About Tim and Jack, about what they need, not what we want. Are you willing to have that conversation?" She hit send before she could change her mind, then waited in the darkness of her kitchen for a response that might change everything or nothing at all. The reply came 30 minutes later. "Yes, whenever you're ready. Wherever you choose. I'll be there." Chapter 8. The Olive Branch and the Storm. The Children's Museum on a Saturday afternoon felt like neutral territory. Sana had chosen it carefully, a place where Tim and Jack would be comfortable, where there was enough activity to buffer the awkwardness of this first intentional meeting. Christy arrived early, his stomach tight with nerves. These were his sons, and how he conducted himself might determine whether he'd ever have a real relationship with them. Sana walked across the parking lot with Tim and Jack, holding their hands. The gesture was protective and vulnerable at the same time. "Thank you for coming," Christy said. Tim nodded, his expression guarded. Jack studied Christy with those observant eyes. Sana looked exhausted. "The boys have questions. I've told them they can ask you anything, but I will be here the entire time." "That's fair." For the first hour, Christy followed as they led him through exhibits. Eventually, they ended up in the dinosaur exhibit. "Can I ask you something?" Tim said suddenly. "Anything." When Mom left, did you look for her? Yes, I hired investigators. I spent months searching, but then you stopped. I did. I convinced myself that she'd left because she wanted to be gone, that continuing to search was selfish. What if she just needed more time? Jack asked quietly. Then I failed her. I should have never given up. That's something I'll regret for the rest of my life. Do you love our mom? Tim asked. Christy glanced at Sana. I did. Very much. Whether I still do, I don't know. But I loved her enough 7 years ago that I would have given up everything to keep her. Why didn't your family like her? Jack asked. My family has very narrow ideas about what's acceptable. They thought your mother wasn't right for me because she didn't come from wealth. They were wrong. They threatened her, and she believed them because she loved me enough to protect me from having to choose. That's stupid, Tim said bluntly. If she loved you and you loved her, nothing else should matter. You're right. But fear makes people do stupid things. Are you scared now? Jack asked, terrified. I'm scared you'll decide you don't want me in your lives. But I'm here anyway, because being your father matters more than being comfortable. Coach says fear is just your brain trying to keep you safe. But sometimes safe isn't the same as right. Your coach is smart. They talked for another hour, gradually building something fragile but real. When the museum announced closing time, Tim and Jack seemed disappointed. Can we do this again? Tim asked. Christy looked at Sana, who nodded slowly. If your mother says it's okay, I would really like that. It's okay. We can figure out a schedule. They walked toward the parking lot, and Christy allowed himself to hope. Then his phone rang. Delphine's voice was urgent. Mother filed for emergency grandparents' rights. She's claiming Sana is an unfit mother, that today's visit proves you have parental access, which gives her legal standing. He couldn't breathe. Sana walked back toward him. What happened? My mother filed for grandparents' rights. She's claiming you're unfit, that today's visit proves I already have access. He watched the color drain from her face, watched every bit of trust shatter. You knew. You planned this. No, Sana, I swear, this was your plan all along. I was right about you. I cut ties with her. I told her to stay away, and yet here we are. Your family trying to take my children. Tim and Jack were watching with alarm. Sana's fear transformed into rage. You need to leave. Get away from me and my sons right now. Christy looked at his sons, saw the bewilderment on their faces. He wanted to explain, but that would force them into the middle of an adult conflict. So he walked away. Temperance called. Your mother is forcing this into court. It's going to be public and messy. Every detail will be examined. This is going to traumatize those boys, and I hold you partially responsible. The legal battle that followed was brutal. Court filings painted Sana as unstable. Christy testified about his mother's manipulation, laid bare every toxic family secret. His testimony destroyed any remaining Rogers family standing in Belhaven. The judge ruled in Sana's favor, issuing a restraining order. But the victory felt hollow. The trial had been public, turning the boys' lives into a spectacle. Delphine arrived that evening. They saw everything. Tim and Jack saw the news coverage. They know every ugly detail. Are they okay? No, and Sana blames you. She knows your mother was responsible, but emotionally she sees your family name attached to this trauma. He'd wanted to be their father, but instead he'd become the person whose existence brought chaos. His sons knew who he was now, but they knew him as the man whose family tried to take them from their mother. Chapter 9. The Crucible of Choice. The weeks following the trial felt like existing in a state of permanent grief. Christy stayed in Belhaven, though he moved out of the Belhaven Grand into a smaller rental property on the edge of town, somewhere quieter, less visible, where he could process everything that had happened without constant reminders of the life he'd destroyed. His business suffered. Partners who'd once courted his expertise now distanced themselves from the family scandal. The Rogers name, once a symbol of old money respectability, had become synonymous with dysfunction and cruelty. He testified against his own mother in open court, detailing manipulations and threats that made even seasoned lawyers uncomfortable. That kind of family betrayal, no matter how justified, made people nervous about what he might be capable of in business relationships. He found himself caring less about the professional consequences than he would have expected. Money meant nothing when his sons existed 3 miles away and he couldn't see them. Success felt hollow when every achievement was built on the foundation of missing their childhood, of not being there when they lost their first teeth or learned to read or discovered their passions. Dr. Winters helped him navigate the complicated grief of losing something he'd never actually had. Their therapy sessions became the anchor of his week, the only place where he could be honest about the rage and sorrow and self-recrimination that threatened to consume him. "You're punishing yourself," she observed during one session. "Sabotaging your own life because you believe suffering is what you deserve. Maybe it is. Or maybe you're trying to prove to Sana that you're genuinely remorseful by destroying everything you built, as if that somehow makes up for the childhood you missed with your sons. But martyrdom isn't the same as accountability, and suffering doesn't undo harm. Then what does? Time, consistent action. Becoming genuinely different, not just performing difference for an audience, and accepting that sometimes, despite our best efforts, relationships don't heal the way we want them to. Sometimes the damage is permanent. The possibility of permanent damage haunted him. He'd started writing letters to Tim and Jack again, not because he expected responses, but because he needed them to know he was still there, still thinking about them, still willing to show up whenever they might want him. The letters were honest about his failures and his hopes, about who he'd been and who he wanted to become. He sent them in care of Temperance, who'd agreed to hold them until and unless the boys were ready to read them. March arrived with the first hints of spring, and with it came an unexpected phone call from Sana. Her voice was careful, distant, the voice of someone who'd built walls so high that breaching them might be impossible. "The boys want to see you," she said without preamble. "Not because I think it's a good idea, not because I've forgiven you, but because they've asked repeatedly, and I can't keep saying no without becoming the person who keeps them from their father. I understand. You'll come to the house, supervised, for 1 hour. If it goes well, we'll consider making it a regular thing. If it doesn't, if you do anything that makes them uncomfortable or scared, this stops permanently. Thank you. Don't thank me. I'm doing this for them, not for you." The visit was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon, and Christy spent the intervening days in a state of anxious preparation. What did you bring to a first visit with sons who knew you but didn't know you? Who'd watched your family try to destroy their mother, who had every reason to hate you? He arrived at the Willow Street house with nothing except himself, deciding that gifts felt manipulative, given the circumstances. Sana answered the door looking exhausted, her natural hair pulled back, her expression guarded. "They're in the living room. 1 hour, I'll be in the kitchen." Tim and Jack sat side by side on the couch, a united front, their expressions serious. They'd grown in the months since he'd seen them, not physically but emotionally, their innocence worn away by adult conflicts they'd been forced to witness. "Hi," Christy said, sitting in the chair across from them, maintaining distance. "Hi," they echoed in unison. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Christy realized he had no idea how to do this, how to bridge the gap between who he wanted to be and who they'd seen him become through the trial and its aftermath. "You can ask me anything," he offered finally. "I won't lie and I won't avoid the hard questions." Tim, always the bolder one, spoke first. "Is your mom evil?" The question was so direct it almost made Christy laugh. "I don't think people are evil exactly. I think they're broken in ways that make them hurt others. My mother values control and appearances more than actual relationships, and that makes her cruel without her necessarily realizing it. So not evil, but definitely harmful." "Did she really try to take us from Mom?" Jack asked. "Yes. She filed legal documents claiming your mother wasn't capable of raising you properly and that our family needed to intervene. She was wrong, and the judge agreed she was wrong, but yes, she tried. Why do you still come around if your family is so awful? Tim challenged. Why not just leave us alone like Mom wants? This was the heart of it, the question that mattered most. Christy took a moment to formulate his answer carefully. Because you're my sons. Because I missed the first 6 years of your lives, and I can't get those back, but I might have the chance to be part of the rest of your lives if you'll let me. Because walking away might be easier for everyone, but it would mean teaching you that when things get hard, people give up. And I don't want that to be what you learn from me. What if we don't want you? Jack asked quietly. What if we're happier without you around? The words hurt more than Christy had anticipated. Then I'll respect that. This isn't about what I want. It's about what's best for you. If having me in your lives causes more harm than good, then the loving thing for me to do is step back and let you grow up without that complication. But you'd be sad, Jack observed. Very sad. But your well-being matters more than my feelings. Tim seemed to process this. The letters you write. Temperance has been giving them to us, even though Mom doesn't know. We've read all of them. Christy's heart stuttered. All of them? All of them, Tim confirmed. The ones about your own dad dying when you were young. The ones about how you wish you'd been there when we were babies. The ones where you talk about being scared you'll never be good enough to be our father. We read them all. And? Christy hardly dared to ask. And we think you're trying, Jack said. We think you've made mistakes, but you're trying to fix them. We think maybe Mom is scared to let you in because she's been hurt so much. But that doesn't mean you're the same as your family. We also think you should know that we've been talking to Mom about possibly giving you a chance, Tim added. Not like moving in with you or calling you Dad right away or anything, but maybe spending time together sometimes. Letting you come to games and stuff. Being people who know each other instead of strangers. The hope that flared in Christy's chest was almost painful. What does your mother think about that? She's scared, Jack said simply. But she's listening. She's not saying no immediately, which is different from before. They talked for the rest of the hour, and while nothing was resolved, the conversation felt like the first genuine connection Christy had managed with his sons. They told him about school and basketball and art projects. He told them about his childhood and what it was like growing up feeling like he never quite fit into his own family. They laughed a few times, cautious laughter but real, and when the hour ended, neither twin seemed eager for him to leave. Sana appeared in the doorway. Time's up. Can he come back next week? Tim asked. Same time? Sana's expression was conflicted, but she nodded. Same time. Same rules. Over the following months, those weekly visits became the center of Christy's existence. They were awkward at first, stilted conversations and long silences, but gradually something like rapport developed. He learned that Tim was terrible at keeping secrets, and Jack could go hours without speaking when he was focused on drawing. He discovered that they both loved terrible puns and could argue about basketball statistics with the kind of passion usually reserved for much more important topics. He attended Jack's spring art show, sitting in the back of the school gymnasium and watching his son beam with pride as parents admired his work. He showed up at every one of Tim's games, no longer hiding in the back, but sitting in the bleachers where Tim could see him, cheering when appropriate, but mostly just being present. Sana maintained her distance, supervising the visits but never joining the conversations, watching with an expression that suggested she was waiting for him to fail, waiting for proof that trusting him had been a mistake. But he kept showing up, kept being consistent, kept demonstrating that he could be relied upon even when it was difficult. Then, in late April, something shifted. Christy arrived for his weekly visit to find Sana sitting on the front porch, alone. Tim and Jack were visible through the window, playing video games inside. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Just you and me. The boys know you're here, but they're giving us some time." "Of course." She led him to the backyard, where early spring flowers were beginning to bloom in beds she'd obviously tended with care. They sat on a weathered bench, maintaining careful distance, and for a long moment neither spoke. "I've been wrong about some things," Sana said finally. "Not everything. Your mother is exactly as toxic as I believed, and your family did try to destroy me. But I was wrong about you. I thought you were like them, that eventually you'd revert to type and hurt us the way they tried to hurt us. But you've shown up every week for months now, even when I was hostile, even when it would have been easier to walk away. That means something. I'm trying to be better than I was. I know. I can see that. And the boys, they care about you. Tim talks about you constantly, and Jack has started drawing pictures of the four of us together, which he only does when he's processing something important emotionally." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe, possibly, we could try something different. Not supervised visits in my living room, but actual co-parenting. Weekends at your place sometimes. Shared custody in a real way, not just the minimum required contact. I'm saying I'm willing to trust you cautiously because my sons deserve a father, and you've earned the right to try being that person." Relief flooded through him, profound and overwhelming. "Thank you. I promise I won't." "Don't make promises," she interrupted. "Just keep showing up. Keep being consistent. Keep putting them first. That's all I need from you." They sat together in the spring sunshine, not touching, not even fully comfortable, but for the first time in 7 years, not adversaries. Just two people who'd loved each other once and had created something beautiful, despite all the ways they'd failed each other. "Can I ask you something?" Christy ventured. "Maybe. The letters you kept, the ones the boys found in the attic. Why did you keep them if you'd decided we were done?" She was quiet for a long time. "Because they were proof that someone loved me completely, even if only for a little while. Because in the darkest times, when I was working 3 jobs and barely sleeping and wondering if I'd made terrible choices, I could read them and remember what it felt like to be loved like that. And because I wanted to believe that maybe someday, somehow, there might be a way back to something good. I didn't think it was possible, but I couldn't quite let go of hoping. Is it possible now? I don't know, maybe. Not now, not soon, but maybe eventually. We're not the same people we were, Christy. We've both been changed by what happened, by the choices we made, by everything we survived. I don't know if the people we are now could love each other the way the people we were did. But you're not saying it's impossible. I'm saying I'm willing to find out, slowly, carefully, without expectations or pressure. I'm saying that if we focus on being good parents, maybe someday we can figure out if there's anything else worth saving between us." It wasn't a declaration of love or a promise of reconciliation, but it was hope. And hope was more than Christy had allowed himself to feel in a very long time. Chapter 10. The Long Road Home. Summer arrived with warmth that felt like permission to start over. Tim and Jack began spending weekends at Christy's rental house, a modest place with a yard where they could play basketball and space where Jack could set up an art corner. The arrangement was messy and imperfect, filled with forgotten homework and disputes about bedtimes and all the ordinary chaos of parenting that Christy had missed for so long. He was terrible at it initially. He burned breakfast and forgot to pack lunches, and had no idea how to handle the inevitable conflicts between two strong-willed boys. But he learned slowly, making mistakes and apologizing and trying again. Sana maintained boundaries, but softened incrementally. She texted him advice about Tim's food allergies or Jack's tendency to have nightmares during thunderstorms. They were co-parents, not partners, but the foundation was there for something more if both of them could find the courage to try. In October, on what would have been their 10th anniversary if they'd married as planned, Dania called him. "The boys are at Temperance's tonight. I thought maybe we could have dinner, not as co-parents checking in about schedules, but as two people who used to love each other and might want to remember what that felt like." They met at a quiet restaurant on the outskirts of town. The conversation was stilted at first, but gradually they found their rhythm. Sana told him about her years in Providence, the fear and determination that had shaped her. Christy told her about the empty years after she'd left, how discovering the boys had shattered every illusion he'd built about having moved on. "I'm not asking for us to go back," she said over dessert. "But I wonder sometimes if there might be a way forward. Not now, maybe not for years, but eventually. I'd like that," Christy said carefully. "Whatever it looks like, however long it takes." They didn't make promises or declarations. They just sat together and allowed themselves to imagine a future where they might be more than just Tim and Jack's parents. By early autumn, they'd established a routine that felt sustainable. Tim and Jack spent weekdays with Sana and weekends with Christy. They attended Jack's art shows together, sat side by side at Tim's basketball games. When Tim scored the winning basket in his championship game and ran to them afterward, he didn't have to choose which parent to hug first because they were standing together. In late October, during a conversation about spring break plans, something shifted. Jack was telling an elaborate story, and Tim was interrupting to correct details, and Christy and Sana caught each other's eyes and laughed simultaneously. The laughter faded into something more serious. Christy spoke the words he'd been holding back. "I'm not asking for forgiveness or a second chance at romance, not right now, but I want you to know that if you ever, someday, when enough healing has happened, want to explore whether there's still something between us, I'll be there." Sana was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if we can ever be more than parents who share children. The wounds are deep, but I've learned not to close doors I once thought were permanently sealed. So I'm not saying yes, but I'm not saying never." Thanksgiving arrived, and Delphine insisted on hosting dinner at her apartment. It was awkward and occasionally tense, but Tim and Jack were happy, and that made everything else bearable. Christy watched his sons argue good-naturedly over dessert. He watched Sana laugh at something Temperance said, her guard lowered. He saw the way Jack kept glancing between his parents, tracking the subtle ways they'd begun to exist comfortably in the same space. Near the end of the evening, Sana stood to help clear dishes, and Christy joined her in the kitchen. Their hands brushed while reaching for the same plate, and neither pulled away immediately. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for keeping your promises, for being the father they deserved, even when I made it almost impossible. Thank you for giving me the chance." They stood together in Delphine's kitchen, surrounded by the sounds of their sons laughing in the other room. The future was uncertain, but they'd built something real from the ruins of their past. Not a fairy tale, not a simple resolution. Just two people learning that healing took longer than breaking. That trust had to be earned inch by painful inch. Sana watched Christy through the kitchen doorway, seeing him help Jack with something, and felt something shift in her chest. Not love, not yet, maybe not ever in the way it had been before, but something that might eventually become a cautious, hard-won hope. Some stories end with a kiss, with declarations of forever, with the illusion that love conquers all. This one ends with Christy Rogers and Sana Rosa learning that love doesn't conquer anything. People do, one impossible day at a time, one fragile choice after another, building bridges across chasms they themselves created, not knowing if those bridges will hold, but stepping onto them anyway, because their sons are watching. Because the alternative is to teach Tim and Jack that some wounds are too deep to heal, and neither of them can bear to pass that inheritance on to the next generation.